Is it Molly or?
It's me. I'm recording.
Oh, hey,
Oh, you are
hey, Molly.
recording. Are you, Molly, are you also like letting people in the waiting room?
Yep, I will be in charge of that.
Okay, welcome everyone to Balkan Circle on this Friday before our fall break, Thanksgiving break here in the US, University of Texas. My name is Mary Newberger. I'm a professor here, professor of history at UT Austin, and also the director of our Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies.
Thank you very much, Mary. I'm also thrilled and excited. This is the penultimate meeting that we're having, and we're going on a break. However, it's Friday. That means Balkan Circle time. And my name is Kirill Avramov. I'm an assistant professor at the Department of Slavic and Eurasian Studies. And I'm looking very much forward today to have our guest all the way from Bulgaria, Hristiyan Atanasov, faithful participant in the circle since its inception. Mary, I would like you to introduce our guest today.
Okay, I will do so. So Hristiyan Atanasov is a historian and archivist with research interests in archiving, digitization, Ottoman diplomacy and paleography, monetary and credit history, and the history of liberalism. Atanasov is an archivist at the Central State Archives in Sofia, and also an associate professor in Archival Studies at the University of Library Science and Information Technology in Sofia. He's also head of the Oriental Department of the National Library of Bulgaria, which is where all the Ottoman documents are. And he's published several books and monographs in Bulgarian, including In the Ottoman Periphery, Society and Economy in Vidin and Its Region in the 18th Century, The Development of Agricultural Credit in the Danube Vilayet, the public benefit funds in the 1860s and 70s, and also the Bulgarian 19th century, news sources and reading. So lots of publications. It's very exciting, and he's the man to know in terms of archives in Bulgaria. So we're really happy to have him here in Balkan Circle today, sharing some of his research. I love your title, The Meaning of Money, Credit Institutions in Ottoman Bulgaria in the 18th and 19th century. So take it away.
Well, thank you, Professor Newberger, for your very generous introduction. I would like to begin by saying that thank you for the opportunity to be with you here at the Balkan Circle. I need to make also a clarification that today I will present some of my observation and ideas. My research on the subject is ongoing, and so far I have a few conclusions, but there is a lot more work to be done. So in this sense, any recommendation will be highly appreciated and considered for my future studies. Let me also provide here a brief explanation of what I mean by the term institution. In the lecture, I adopt historical research tools and terminology. Therefore, an institution designates a voluntary or state-imposed association of people who formalize their activities by a relevant document or by virtue of a law. Therefore, the frequent transaction of individuals with usurers, which are also considered to be a type of institution, for example, from sociological perspective, albeit informal, but still some kind of institution, will not be considered here. The lecture will not include also the Jewish association that undoubtedly functioned in the Ottoman Bulgaria, as well as some other institutions that were certainly also present. I'm referring to create institution of Orthodox Christians, people other than Bulgarians, for example, of Greeks or Armenians create credit companies. They will be subject of the separate study. For the sake of objectivity, I have to make a few more preliminary points. In the first place, I am not aware of all of the credit institutions that operated in the Ottoman Bulgaria from the beginning of the 18th until the liberation of and the foundation of the new Bulgarian state in 1878. The archives, Bulgarian or Ottoman, still hold plenty of uncharted lands that remain undiscovered and therefore still unknown to researchers of financial history. In this sense, the possibility that documents on different credit institutions may emerge in the future is relatively high and must also be considered. It is also very difficult to determine on which institution were credit institution after all. Basically, when we refer to the Ottoman Empire, we cannot speak definitely on institution in the historical sense of the term, engage as their main activity in lending at interest with the priority objective of making profit for the period from the beginning of the empire's foundation until the 1830s, by which time we already had banking in the modern sense of the word. Research shows that any voluntary or administratively imposed association of people for whatever purpose, building of a church, establishment of a school, care for orphans, or the development of trade and manufacturing, which resulted in generation of some money, would be considered a lending institution if the capital was used to prove loans for the purpose of earning even a minimal interest. We have many such cases documented in the Ottoman Bulgaria in the period from the 18th to end 19th century, and it would be logical to assume that undocumented lending or borrowing by a non-credit institution, which turned out to be de facto credit institution, was probably a common practice. When looking for institutions that prioritize lending, it is worth mentioning the famous cash waqfs. They were practicing usury and could be designated as credit institution, but their purpose was not and could not have been at least in accordance with the law profit, but was seen rather as a means of providing subsequent charity. The same can be said of the so-called funds for orphans, of which we know relatively little before they were more comprehensively institutionalized by the Ottoman state through a special regulation in the 1851. The remaining lending institutions are craftsmen guilds, esnafs, municipalities, church and school boards, trading companies, and so on, which exercise certain lending practices without this being their primary business activity. Credit institutions in the modern sense of the word in Ottoman Bulgaria were established only in the late of 1840s and were an Orthodox Christian affair. This was the Sliven Societies or Joint Stock Association, whose aim was unequivocally profit by interest. At the beginning of the 1860s, Midhat Pasha also established the so-called public benefit funds, which prioritized lending to the rural population and were a type of institution established by the state. How can I arrange these facts together and so that I may have a better understanding of the genesis of the credit institution, their tasks, abilities, and purpose? Can I draw distinction between them along religious lines, Islamic and Orthodox Christian, or such by origin and administration of capital, private, municipal, or state organizations? These are some of questions I will seek to answer in my attempt to explain why some of these lending institutions disappeared, while others proved to be more resilient over time. The lecture will focus on two theoretical issues that seems to me most important at this stage. The Ottoman state intervention in the credit market. Here, the Ottoman administrators used two types of tools. The one was a legal regulation of interest rate. The second was a direct intervention in the market through the establishment of a credit institution. Such as mentioned was public benefit funds. The first instrument was unsuccessful, excuse me, but the second was had a remarkable result. The second theoretical issue relates to the gradual weakening of religious norms and the corresponding rationalization of attitudes toward interest. Here a development is observed, in some kind of development was observed. In most cases, lending institution needs some moral justification for providing money at interest. For example, the obligation to put the money earned from profits into charitable initiatives, building roads, maintaining mosques and churches, schools, and so on. This is stipulated in the statute of institution as cash waqfs, as NAP funds, public benefit funds, orphan funds, etc. However, private joint stock companies appeared also, and they also gave money at interest. They had no religious or moral commitments about how to spend their profit, which is very interesting. Their aim was to benefit the shareholders and nothing more than that. So I will start with the religion and history as a foundation stone of the great attitude of the Ottoman state and to this type of usury operations. So the common human activity of getting a loan and consequently giving one for the sake of making a profit is an action that was certainly known to the earlier civilizations. Loans of grain, metals, and coins were offered by Sumerians, Hellenes, and Romans. Such an ancient and frequent practice could not go unnoticed by the world's monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. To a bigger or lesser degree, they all form a stance toward usury. As a rule, this stance was negative. We have a prohibition on lending for profit in the sacred texts of all three religions, in the Old and the New Testament, I mean the Torah and the Gospels, as well as in the Holy Quran. There are, however, significant nuance within the Christianity among the lines of Western and Eastern churches, or the primacy of the Papal Caesarism theocracy or the Caesaropapism. In the Eastern Orthodox Christian world, due to the adopted principle of Caesaropapism or the domination of secular over religious power, we observe a more tolerant attitude towards usury. It was not forbidden, as for example in the Western Europe by the Catholic Church, but for example, the Byzantine Empire tries to regulate it. This is also what the Ottoman sultans would do, and they would not prohibit lending either. They just try to fix interest rate by specific regulation and specific laws. So such profound and divergent influences make it difficult for me to arrange great institution by any single attribute. It may be difficult to move towards a classical economic division based on the source of capital, private, municipal, or state. For example, the coffers of church boards were filled by contribution from private individuals, but also by other income, donation, bequests, rents from properties, and so on. This is also true of public institutions, municipalities, schools, etc., which manage to establish their own coffers, from which they then lend money at interest. Public benefits, on the other hand, were in practice formed with private capital, but after administrative intervention, they were promoted by the state. It could be considered a formal state institution. It is difficult to clarify great institution on religious ground too. For example, orphan funds were associated with the classical Islamic practices, but we can be certain that there was a similar initiatives to provide orphans with the means of decent livelihood among Christians and Jewish communities also. Moreover, these institutions were run out a low level by both Muslims and Christians. The Ottoman cash waqfs were an Islamic institution, but we also have evidence of waqfs of Christians, monk and monasteries owned waqfs properties, and so on. Having all this specific under consideration, in this particular talk, I adopt a formal division based on religion, albeit this is very conditional. It is necessary since purely Orthodox Christian institutions such as church boards lent at interest and mind their own money. Obviously, Muslim and Jewish could not have been members of them, though there was nothing preventing them from being their customers. Moreover, without overexposing this fact, the more tolerant attitude to interest by Eastern Orthodox Christianity, together with strong Western influence, of course, will prove, in my opinion, to be the factor which would eventually lead to the emergence of modern creative institutions with profit as their primary aim. So, Islamic institution, I will start with the Islamic institution, and particularly I will begin with the so-called monetary or cash waqfs, for which there is a considerable body of literature. A waqf is actually a religious foundation that includes certain property, movable or unmovable, to proceed of which were used to some noble cause. This was a private sector of the empire, which, in the opinion of specialists, was forming about a third of its economy. In the previous centuries, especially during the 15th and 16th centuries, were established extensive land waqfs in the Balkans and the Bulgarian lands in particular. This was done by means of a particular will, the so-called waqfname, in which the owner of the property determined that part of the income from it should be used for some noble purpose. It is also how the notorious cash waqfs were formed, which have been repeatedly studied in foreign and Bulgarian historiography. In these waqfs, the amount of money that was designated was used to grant loans at precisely fixed interest rate, usually up to 10%, but there were also cases of the higher rate, 12 and more, and even 15%. Most often with the explicit condition that part of the profit from the interest received would be used for some public good, building a bridge, a fontaine, a kitchen for the poor people, providing supplies for a mosque, etc. Why didn't these cash waqfs become real banks? Instead of seeking for a very detailed and comprehensive answer to this question, I will point out the most obvious. In the first place, all of the conditions relate to the property and its use and exploitation in the case of the waqfs were fixed. The designated amount was precisely specified. It could not be changed. Thus, if for example, the person designate 1,000 arches at the end of the 17th century, from then in the 18th and in the following 19th century, this amount would be gradually depreciated. At least it is well known that at least until the 1840s, the Ottoman state continuously devalued its money. The interest rate, the sum that would be spent on public works and other matters were also fixed, which made the cash waqfs quite static over time and unable to adjust, to adapt to the market conditions. Despite these shortcomings, there are a number of records of cash waqfs activities from the Ottoman Bulgaria, even from the 19th century. For example, in the register from Russia, date to the beginning of the 19th century, it is recorded that cash waqfs, part of the income of which was used for paying employers in the masjid, a small Muslim religious building, that is masjid, is in the village of Chervena Voda in the district of town of Russia, receive income from interest. Basically, there are a lot of evidence, albeit scattered, that waqfs lent money at interest through all the period of the Ottoman rule here in Bulgaria. The waqfs, however, had certain limitations, and this prevent them from becoming modern credit institution. So, the orphan funds. The orphan funds were a credit institution that had recently attracted the attention of researchers from Bulgaria. The exact term found in the records is orphan coffers. What were these funds and where can we find their origins? This was actually a rather old practice according to which the property of the deceased person was not transferred directly to their minor heirs, but was usually sold at auction, and only after the child reached a certain age received its rightful inheritance. The procedure was usually supervised by the Ottoman judge, the kaza, who also appoint a guardian for the children. The proceeds from the sale of the properties were kept in the designated coffer and lent at interest. In the 1851, the Ottoman state formally institutionalized the orphan funds by promulgating a special regulation of their functioning, followed by other regulations. In accordance with this regulation was establishing the orphan estate administration, the so-called Eitami Val Nezareti, which was subordinate to the Sheikh Islam office in Istanbul. Until recently, this institution were only mentioned by his Bulgarian researcher in their studies on credit in a larger context, and have only recently attracted more attention. In particular, there is studies Nadia Manova on orphanage in town of Trn. In her research, Manova makes undeniably important contribution that answers some questions, but raises many more as well. In the first place, it is striking that the funds apparently relied heavily on the Islamic, Jewish, and Christian tradition of mutual aid in this sphere at the local level, and especially that they, to some extent, complementing each other with the later established public benefit funds. As Nadia Manova notes, there is no known records confirming that institutions found by Medhat Pasha in 1863, the public benefit funds, were lending money to women. In contrast, in the case of town of Trn, there were 25 loans out of 106, or approximately 22% granted to women, of whom only 2 were widows and rest had no relation to deceased. This was probably not a unique and isolated case from the town of Trn, and it seems that actually this was the institution that lent to women in the Ottoman Bulgaria, which is very interesting. From the state institution, only the orphan funds were institution which lending to women. I will stop here with the assumptions regarding the orphan funds, and we will add that this is undoubtedly a lending institution that deserves further study, both in the context of the Christian and Islamic tradition of providing necessary care for children, and in terms of their apparently close interaction with the public benefit funds. There were undoubtedly an important instrument of the credit, but the very act of the extending credit and seeking higher profit was not their priority. This was done so that the assets of the deceased could be preserved and possibly increased, with the ultimate objective of passing them on the children when they come of age. This is an important initial commitment that must necessarily be considered when researching this type of institutions. So, public benefit funds. The next institution that must be mentioned are the public benefits or the common benefits funds, or they're usually use different type of terms in the works of the different researchers, which were established by the Ottoman state with the main purpose of providing cheap credit to the rural population. They, as a matter of fact, also could not escape the religious norms and morality, and when the Ottoman administrators established them, they explicitly emphasized that a part of their profits would be used for common pleasing purposes. For example, the Danube newspaper published the rules of the institution, and it is proclaimed that the profit that remains from the interest of the capital of the city coffers, which will be spent to meet the expense for maintaining schools, roads, fountains, and bridges. Except for these four kinds of charitable works, the profit is not allowed to be spent on anything else. This condition that the profits must necessarily be used for a public good was evidently all too characteristic of Ottoman lending institutions. We can see this in case of cash waqfs, which spend their profits on such activities, and it is also present in the case of orphan funds. The ultimate authorities insist on very much on pursuing public benefits in order to provide a more God-pleasing profile to this otherwise, from the religious point of view, morally reprehensible actions of the institutions to offer loans at interest. So here I will continue with the mixed type of institution, Islamic and Orthodox Christian institutions. Here I will present the craftsmen guilds organization in the cities, which could be composed of Christians only, Muslims only, and have mixed membership. They also set up their own coffers, which were generally used for a mutual aid, to help building religious buildings, schools, and so on. Loans were also given at low interest or even interest-free to members of the same guild if need arises. There is evidence that the guild's coffers also grant loans to persons external to the institution concerned. The researcher, for example, the researcher Nicola Lazarov summarized that by 1850s, there were about 3,000 guild coffers operating in Ottoman Bulgaria, and that's a very impressive number. It is known that in the 18th and the 19th centuries, the guild coffers provide loans to their members at interest rates around and below 10%, which were the interest rates demanded by the guild's coffers in exchange for credit in the 1850s. In 1866, the Furious in town of Ohrid established their own coffer, which, in the expression of some authors, quickly become in practice a local bank that provide the financial backbone of the public life in Ohrid. It is possible to present many other similar examples, but even from this, it becomes clear that guild coffers can also conditionally be classified as institution performing credit activity. although this was obviously not their main objective. Orthodox Christian institutions aiming, common good deeds. Orthodox Christian institutions also played a significant role in local economic life. It is known, for example, that some church boards made their own coins, which is very well presented, for example, in Hristiyan Atanov's valuable study, and recently analyzed and theoretically clarified by two Bulgarian scholars, I mean Penchu Penchev and Nikolai Nenus. According to other scholar, Pavel Stefanov, for example, there is no doubt that the Bulgarian church began to develop lending activities following the example of the waqfs in the middle of the 18th century, which provoked the anger of the moralist hieromonarch Joseph Bradati of the Riva Monastery, who asked a rhetorical question: it is decent for a monk to be avaricious and to gain money from good. Despite these negative opinions, the practice continued, and we have records on laws given by the, for example, church in the Buyana district of Sofia for the period from the 1762 to 1878 and so on. In addition, loans were also provided by Bulgarian municipality, school and community boards and other associations. Loans were also provided by school coffers. Thanks to the very interesting study, for example, study by Veselin Guranchev, we know that the mutual school in the Arbanasi, like other schools on that area, also operate as a credit institution. A document from the 1846 records the borrowers who borrowed from the school treasury at the interest they own accordingly. The author also points out that relatively high interest rate at which the school lent money, it was 20%, probably on annual basis. So the capitalist type of the credit institutions. Summarizing the information I have from research and source at this time, I should also present the business entity that had no imposed commitment, either religious or moral, to justify the usurious operation they carry out, and the duty to ensure that a portion of their realized profits will be used for the common good. In my view, these were capitalistic entities in spirit, pursuing the self-interest of the partners who own them without subordinating them to the common interest. With these entities, again, I will prove conditional analysis, insofar as not all partnerships have credit as their main activity. In most cases, it was combined by trade, production, and generally any other source of profit. For example, the main activity of the Galatian and Bucharest offices of the trading house of famous Bulgarian traders Evogi and Hristo Georgievi was usually trade, but gradually credit operation gained more and more importance. The trading companies in town of Plovdiv carry out many credit operations along with the trade. Thus, the first Bulgarian trade association during the period of the 18th to 19th centuries proved to be very flexible and eventually distribute their activities skillfully, giving priority to one or another depending on the circumstances. They can be regarded as credit institutions because they were also actively engaged in usury. However, if I have to single out a purely credit institution which was primarily engaged in usury in order to generate profit for its shareholders, then I should undoubtedly present the Sliven companies, one of which, according to the Bulgarian historian Ivan Rusi, was the earliest prototype of banking institution in Ottoman Bulgaria known at the present time. An institution that provides its capital against annual interest of about 21%. In this case, it is important detail that there is the publication of the Memorandum of Association of the Compania Lichvena, the interest company, of 1st of September 1858, a company which can be considered as successor of the earliest Slivensko Sadružje, Sliven Society, in which contract there is not a single clause regulating any further expenditure of the profit on common good purposes. On the contrary, we read there, as much as this society shall gain by the annual payment, with God's help, we shall divide after calculating the expenses from that year between the partners according to the capital they invest. And we shall also divide the loss from which may God preserve us. Furthermore, the partners specifically emphasize that they will work only for their own benefits and no one else. All of the above conditions we found very spoken and agree against abusing them. And we will work sincerely and faithfully for the benefits of the partnership. Apparently, the founders of Compania Lichvena of Sliven did not have any religious or moral consideration, and most sincerely declared that the priority for them is the profit of the company and their personal benefit. The Bulgarian commercial company, which was founded on the 1st February 1869 in the town of Varna, also developed credit lending activity. It was for a long time considered the earliest bank in the Bulgarian lands. Its statutes have also been published, and it is evident from the document that the company commitment its activities solely to the interests of its shareholders. So there are many other similar examples that could be listed, but I will stop here, and I will give you some notes about the Western banking institutions, which also start to create during that period, 1830s, initially in the Galat district of Istanbul, mostly by Armenians and Greeks, but also by foreign merchants with considerable capital. Later, in the 1863, was established the Imperial Ottoman Bank with English and French capital, which, according to Turkish scholar Şevket Pamuk, played a role of the quasi-central bank of the empire. According to another Turkish scholar, Ethem Eldem, so he have opinion that the bank, which also had a strong state participation, was important for the overall agenda of the Ottoman government, and was an instrument of state policy for modernization. This bank opened branch in Rus and Plovdiv. The Danube newspaper published the Dunov newspaper published in several issues information about the opening of a branch of the Ottoman Bank in the town of Ruse. The bank branch was founded and managed by two foreigners, Hans and Kur. Several other banks were also established, but they had little relation to the Ottoman Bulgaria. So it is interesting to emphasize on some, how to say, theoretical questions about how the Ottoman state tried to fix interest rate and try to put it down using, how to say, football terminology to tackle the higher interest rate and to increase them. The Ottomans used two types of tools by publishing special laws, and by second type by using the market instruments through creation of the credit institution. So in the 1851, Sami Pasha, for example, a government commissioner for the overseeing of the administration efforts in carrying out the reforms in the Ottoman Bank House, issued an order that the borrowers would have to pay an interest of 8% or at most 12%. The next year, there is a new regulation, but the result, all of this legislative measure, however, had no effect, and this is evident from the certain facts. For instance, several years after they were enacted in the Sliven, the above mentioned private credit institution called the interest company, Compania Lichvena, gave loans with an interest rate between 19 to 24%. So nobody cares in this case from the Ottoman government and its regulations. So the second regulation attempts in the 1864, the Ottoman authorities issued a new regulation. It was then that the new Statute of Lawful Interest Rates was published, which set the rate of interest on loans to 1% monthly or 12% yearly, with the exception of those who have Cuirucliu Senet and capital managed by the orphan establishments. So, however, the creation of public benefit funds in the 1863 was succeed in reducing interest rate. Some private lending institutions went bankrupt because they could not meet the challenge of lower interest rate. Gradually, the interest rate reached 9% annum in 1876. It should be pointed out that the reduction of interest rates contradicts the general trend of the increasing of public debt of the Ottoman Empire in the 1870s. But despite this market pressure, the Ottoman state decided, and according to me, succeed to secure lower interest rates on loans to ordinary subjects. So some words in conclusion. Apparently, there is a wide variety of institutions that offer credit, either as their primary or secondary business activities. However, diversity does not guarantee sufficient supply of credit service and therefore competition. Most institutions practiced creating as something that was complementary to their main activities. They are the various treasures, coffers of municipalities, guilds, associations, church, and so on. It was not until the late of 1840s that emerged institutions which were engaged primarily of lending loans at interest. Initially, these were private institutions, but they subsequently coexist with the state-owned entities, the orphan funds, especially after the 1860s when the public benefit funds were found. The vast majority of the lending institutions remained more or less influenced by the religious norms and fundamentally negative attitude of the medieval worldview towards interest and usury. They therefore sought a moral justification of their activities. Whether sincere or not, it's impossible to conclude. This is virtually true of all institutions, including the Ottoman state credit institution, where it was legally guaranteed that the part of the profit derived from interest would be used for the common good. The exception of this trend were the private Orthodox institutions, credit institutions, originally founded in Sliven, for example. There were a novelty not only in terms of organization, use of shareholder principle, etc., but also new in spirit. They did not seek moral justification of their profit from usurious operation. So looking through not purposely for new modern capitalist type institutions that have no religious inhibitions, I should point out that in the Ottoman Bulgaria, they were Orthodox Christian institutions. It is difficult to assess the volume of capital of state, municipal versus private credit institutions. It is rather likely that the former, I mean the state institution, played a dominant role, especially in the comparison with the situation after the liberation of Bulgaria, when state capital had primary role versus private capital. These state-owned credit institutions also provide a more, also prove to be more resilient over time. I don't know, probably because of some turbulence here in Bulgaria after the 1878, or because specific features related to national psychology of Bulgarian society, it's difficult to say with certainty. Either way, the facts are conclusive that the first private credit institution of modern type in Bulgarian lands did not last very long. Some of them did not survive the liberation. In contrast, the public benefit at the orphan funds turned out to be more to be the foundation of the Bulgarian Agricultural Bank and the popular banks, which were established after the 1878. So that was from me. Thank you for your attention, and if you have questions, I will be glad to answer them, if I can, of course.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Благодаря.
I mean, I can start with the first question, and then maybe people in the audience can be formulating your questions. First of all, I think it's fascinating that money, that in the capitalist era, like there's no morality around money anymore, essentially. But that there used to be. And it's like, if we still have this way of thinking about money, I think our economy and our world would be completely different. But so I'm fascinated by the fact that these different kind of institutions were focused on the public good. And then later they weren't. And one thing that I was just thinking about when you talk about this sort of transition in the mid-19th century to some of these more purely capitalist kind of institutions, or even the Ottoman Imperial Bank, which was funded by French and British capital, is that it's really the beginning of the end for the Ottoman Empire. And part of that is the debt that they went into in that period. And this debt, which became largely controlled, as you know, by foreign interests, became the sort of death of the Ottoman Empire. They just got deeper, dug themselves deeper into debt. The regime takes over, Ottoman regime, where they're, directly, I know this from my tobacco book, like taking things like tobacco profits and directly garnering that to pay off the debt. So I'm just fascinated that just happens to coincide in time. And maybe you could just sort of speak to that, like how sort of disastrous it may have been for the Ottoman Empire, if not for individuals. Like, I guess, talk about debt as a sort of negative aspect of this turn to kind of a more capitalist credit kind of model.
Yeah. Actually, I'm not sure that there is, how to say, strong relation between the emergence of the private credit institution and the debt of empire. Probably it's a coincidence. For me, how to say, it's difficult to be explained, but for my opinion, it's more likely to empire to survive if there was more of private credit institution, and if they were able to compete each other, and in that way to reduce interest rates. But that is very interesting in that Ottomans actually managed to deal with this credit institution by promoting their own credit institution. And this is strictly, how to say, connect with the not only Bulgarian, but how to say, Balkan psychology. Here we are always suspicious about the private sector and private institutions. We always have to look about some kind of state institutions which will be able to manage to deal with our problems and to manage to how to say, to make our life easier. I'm not sure, but probably because of that, empire was not able to, not only because of that, but this was one of the reasons, because Ottoman Empire come to an end, because actually it was unable to be how to say, competitive to the Western countries because of the lack of this kind of thinking. We have to earn more profits to be able to generate more capital and so on and so on. For me, it's not necessary to be a bad future for the Ottoman Empire, but obviously it seems to be some kind of disadvantage feature that makes it not able to deal with the Western capitalistic type of
keep up. Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
thank
think
you.
that sorry, Kirill, I just wanted to follow up with that. Just one quick thing. Yeah, like that's definitely a debate I've seen in, there's not as much economic history being written on the Ottoman Empire on this side of the pond anymore, but that was kind of a debate I remember reading about in graduate school. Like, what did the Balkans need more capitalism or less? Basically in this period, like, did it destroy them or was there not enough? So and maybe we'll never know. So sorry, go ahead, Kirill.
No, thank you. Well, I will make several notes, also pose a question and then open, because we do have questions in the chat, and I believe from the audience. Thank you very much, Hristiyan, for making this historic journey and making us think about the origins of the modern banking system, in essence, in Bulgaria. I have a couple of very interesting, sort of things that, came to my mind, questions that came from your slides and from your narrative. One of them is that you kept mentioning that Eastern Orthodoxy was more tolerant towards certain type of banking activities or lending, activities for, lending for interest as compared to the West. So my first question is, what explains that? And my second one is tied to it. How come? Because I was fascinated by this early history of the waqf. So waqf in itself, had all the preconditions to develop into having in mind that it's more tolerant context. Had more precondition to develop into a modern bank, and yet it didn't happen. This is my second question. And my third one, which really I thought was also fascinating, that in 1851, you have the first recording institution that lends to women. How does that compare, East to West? I thought that this is a lot of kind of interesting points, revolutionary, if you will. Thank you.
Yeah, I will start with the third question. Actually, the first recorded loans to women by Ottoman state credit institution was at the 1863 or something like that. The regulation was from 1851, but that's not important. For me, it's regarding only the state institutions. We have plenty of information about the women who were engaged in usury operation themselves. They were Muslim women, I mean, which were, how to say, loan sharks, usurer. So that was by now, only about example for the orphan funds from Trump. I think that only speaking about the state, Ottoman state created institution, the institution which lending money at interest to women are only this type of institution. We have a certain more how to say records about the lending money to different subjects, Ottoman subjects, from the public benefit funds. Thousands and thousands of such examples, but even a single note about the lending money to women. Only the orphan funds was an institution that how to say lending to the women. I mean, from the Ottoman state credit institution. So your first question was about the comparison from the Eastern and Western Church. According to some scholars here, the Eastern Orthodox Church was much more tolerant to the usury operation, but it was because of the fact that here the usury operation was never been forbidden. For example, like in the Western Europe, there were strict laws against the interest in Latin Catholic Church, which we don't see here in the Ottoman Balkans, probably because of the most tolerant attitude of the Eastern Orthodox Church to the interest, such kind of interest operations. But that doesn't mean that the Eastern Orthodox Church, how to say, is open to usury operation. Yes, actually, it did some kind of operation, but from moralistic point of view, it was how to say, necessary evil, or
more accommodating.
it was
Yes,
not
I understand.
appreciated. Yeah, it was not appreciated by the church, but it not forbidden them.
Thank you.
And your second question, sorry, but I forgot it.
The second one was, Hristiyan, how come, that waqfs, having this more tolerant atmosphere and having the functionality and operation of a classical sort, or not a classical, but emerging bank, in the waqfs did not emerge in those institutions?
Because all of the conditions were strongly fixed, and because of that, the waqfs was not able to adapt on different market conditions, which were changed over the time. For example, you have a fixed sum which will be allowed to be spent for some purpose. You have also strict and fixed interest rate, and you are not able to change.
So no flexibility, flexibility whatsoever.
No. Because of the religious foundation of this great institution, according to the theory, the waqf's property was not how to say property of the institution, but the property of the same God. So it is not able. You are not able to change anything relating with this.
So in essence, in short, if I understand correctly, just to make it clear, is that religion or religious norm basically, shuts down, any further modernization, even if they operated in much more favorable conditions.
Yeah, definitely. It's quite static. So nothing can be changed.
So just there was one question in the chat about how were these interest rates set, for these different credit institutions. Do you have any idea about that? Or is that discussed in the documents?
How to say, just the Ottoman government issued some kind of regulation, and that's all. So no, it's quite similar like today in Bulgaria. You have a lot of laws, but nobody care about them. So we have how to say, interesting because for example the minting of coins was prerogative only to the Ottoman Sultan. But we have a lot of examples here from the churches in Bulgaria, which also issue their own money, and nobody cares about the sultans on that issue. So that's how to say, a very typical Bulgarian phrase here, "Tsar daleko," so the sultans is far away. Nobody cares about.
Bog visoko, car daleko.
Yeah.
I have another question unless there's someone else that, okay, if not, all right. I'm super interested in these public benefits funds that were set up under Midhat Pasha, and also just all of the changes that went on in that Danube Vilayet under Midhat Pasha. My former student, Mehmet Çelik, was working on that for a long time.
Yeah, Mehmet Bey is a very prominent and very, very strong historian. I know him. Yeah.
Yeah, but the idea that you had a very successful kind of development of that region under Midhat Pasha, but still using what is relatively sort of I guess gentle credit methods for the public good. And particularly, I mean, can you talk about how agricultural cooperatives fit? Are they part of this public benefits fund program? Because I think it was a fairly innovative thing that was happening in Bulgaria and Ottoman Bulgaria under Midhat Pasha with this these rural or agricultural cooperatives, which then continued in Bulgaria, as you know, but I think also was a model used elsewhere in Europe.
Yeah, this type of cooperatives, there are, for my opinion, they are how to say, innovative in some way. In some ways, that what is more important about them is that they were cooperatives, but non-voluntary cooperatives. So Midhat Pasha used typically government and administration tools to force the Bulgarian and other villagers, peasants to cooperate each other and to collect part of the harvest to be sold and to become initial capital of the founding of the cooperatives. Because of that, they were often compared to the Western type of the cooperatives, which also emerged during that period. Raiffeisen and other cooperatives from Central Europe, but they were voluntary type of cooperatives. In our case here, we have a state generated cooperatives. They are much more familiar with probably the communist type of cooperatives after the Second World War. In that way, in this way, also the Bulgarian peasants were obligated to cooperate each other and to make a common cooperatives and so on and so on. So the Midhat Pasha, for me, was the inventor of this type of non-voluntary cooperative initiatives here in Bulgaria. Okay. So in one sentence, they were similar in some features to the Western cooperatives, but in the other cases, they was quite different. And most important feature in which they are different from the Western type of cooperatives was that they were not voluntary initiative. So
Okay.
if you have other questions, I will be glad to answer them if I can, of course. I also have prepared a lot of statistics and records, but
That's always
I
exciting.
decided to miss that because
No, it's okay. I think Stefka has a question.
yeah.
Yeah. Hristiyan, thank you so very much. I'm very excited. I love your talks, you know that. I'm a big fan of yours. Of course, as a woman, I'm really interested. Have you looked at the profile of these women that borrow money? And I'm also very interested in, was there something like an application submission, you know, or something like that? Did they have to go through some type of approval process?
Yeah.
And what they use the money for?
Yeah, very interesting questions, but unfortunately, I don't have certain answers on them. Two of the women who take money from the orphan funds from the town of Tron were widows, but the other 21 women, I don't know what was their profession or what was their wealth status or social status. We don't have any information on that matter because of the loans were scrapped only in one sentence. Stanka, дъщеря на Петко, comes here and get amount of 500 gurushos and something like that. So because of that, it's necessary to be made additional, very micro level researches to be able to answer of that question. Who are these women after all? So what was their professional status or social status? We don't know.
So can we assume that they borrowed this money for business or
Probably. We have a lot more information on the loans from the public benefit funds, and the amount which were received from these funds were used for buying some, how to say, arable lands and instruments for this kind of agricultural producing, but in this case, in the trunk funds and orphan funds and loans for women, I'm not sure. Probably they use this money to some kind of consumptions, but we are not aware what was particular they how to say aim for what they after that using the achieved money. We don't know, unfortunately. That's a very interesting but very micro topic, which need much more research.
And if you allow me one more question, actually I have two, but let's see if we have time. So was there anything similar, something that we can compare to nowadays student loans, and who was the creditor institution? And again, if you can describe if you know anything about the profile of the users of this type of loan.
Actually, specific on that purpose, I'm not aware. I'm not how to say by now. I'm not find any records of such kind of credit institution. But all orphan funds
Yeah.
able to give part of their profits to some kind of educational purposes. If the orphan needs to be, how to say, educated at some kind of school, so he was able to get money in advance from the orphan fund, for the orphan fund. But I have 2 or 3 type such cases, but it's different from the specific institution that proposing the loans to students. Only 3 cases, and these three cases was particularly to orphans. Yeah, they were able to get money from the fund, but probably the other students were not able because they were not orphans.
I understand.
So the fund invests in the education, but only orphan students.
Only if they meet, the specific
This,
status.
yeah.
Yeah.
It seems that basically this is very important, just to make sure that we don't generalize out of inferring those specific, as Hristiyan says, there needs to be more research
it's
on certain things.
Yeah, it's quite a local conclusion. Only from information about the funds in Trump. Unfortunately, by now I'm not able to compare this information with the similar type of records from different Bulgarian towns during that period. We have only this 106 cases.
Yeah, it's a fragment, in essence, but it's still illustrative. I think that it makes sense. Thank you, Stefka, for asking, because at least we know something interesting emerged about that. The status of orphans, that are able to get education at certain sort of additional step forward to make something in life, I suppose, from a very specific borrowing institution. So thank you very much, Mary. I don't know if I see Stefan, also maybe if he has
Stefan.
any questions.
Do you have any questions, Stefan?
Congratulations for your new book about Stefan Stambolov.
Ooh, yeah, I think you would have, with Stambolov, you probably have a lot to say on this topic, but so I guess we're going to wrap it up then for today. Thank you so much, Hristiyan, for this interesting talk, and I know who to come to for all my questions about credit and banking in the 19th century.
Thank you
very
much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming to Balkan Circle. We are going for a break here in the United States, Thanksgiving break, but we're looking forward, to our next meetings. And again, I would like to encourage all of you, our regular participants, if you have particular suggestions, people that you want to see to feature the circle and speak with us, please do not hesitate. And Hristiyan, thank you very much once again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice holidays.
Thank you.
See you.
Thank you so much.
Всем скоро се видим с тебе на
Скоро
живо.
чакам си фанелката.
Да.
Да се видим.
На
Чао.
25 ще съм там.